Hello and welcome to Mabinda TV. So for now, I'd like to look at the Kenyan President William Ruto is in China to borrow more aid. So basically, they are looking at financing more roads for Kenya. So basically, this is why I bring up this question: should Africa lean to the West or to China? Where do you think Africa should lean? Or maybe a third perspective: Africa does not need to lean to the West or to China, but inwards to itself. I think we have so much resources. Africa, we have so much resources. And I think if we utilize these resources well, then Africa will be in good stead. So why is President Ruto of Kenya going to borrow more money from China? I think one thing, if we curbed corruption, and then Kenya and Africa will have lots of money. The problem is that we have leaders that are corrupt. That's the problem. We have leaders that are corrupt and stink to high heaven. So basically, if we borrow our leaders are living lavish lifestyles, and that's why, even though I sympathize with Donald Trump cutting aid for Africa, and Donald Trump slashed the aid for Africa, I think maybe those suffering from AIDS will not get ARVs, because I think that was being funded by US aid. Of course, it was some sort of a soft power policy for America to have the US aid. So, of course, now Donald Trump, through Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, has cut down on Elon Musk Department of Government Efficiency has cut down on aid to Africa, and of course aid to other many countries. So of course I sympathize that some of the core programs, such as a provision of ARV drugs to its patients, that is, it will not be there. But then of course you wonder, why do we need aid at all? Why does Africa need aid at all with all the resources we have? Why does Africa need aid at all? I think we have corrupt leaders, and I think according to the Zambian economist Dr. Dambisa Moore, over $1 trillion has been poured to Africa through aid that is beginning in the 1960s. Up to now, over $1 trillion has been poured to Africa in terms of aid, but there is nothing to show for that aid money. There is nothing to show for that aid money. So, of course, Dr. Dambisa Moore, in her book Dead Aid and How There's a Better Way for Africa, she says that over $1 trillion has been poured to Africa since independence, and there is nothing to show for that money. So basically, what we need to be doing is asking, why then does Africa does Africa need this aid money at all? I think our leaders are just eating this money. If we lived out within our means, if African leaders lived within their means, there would be no need for aid at all. If we did not have corruption, the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta says that in the office of the president, they lose 2 billion shillings. That's about $20 million. So in Kenya, they lose $20 million a day to corruption. So you can imagine that in Kenya, $20 million a day is lost to corruption. That's about 760 billion shillings. That's about $7 billion a year that is lost to corruption, and that's liquid cash that is lost to corruption every year in Kenya. So you can imagine now, picture that with Nigeria, picture that with Angola, picture that with South Africa. So then you will find that then Kenyans lose a lot of money to corruption, and that's because basically we have decided that our leaders basically steal this money and basically take this money to their personal bank accounts. And look at what happens to the corrupt in China. In Japan, the corrupt commit suicide because of the shame they have caused society, so they commit suicide. In China, the corrupt are shot by the firing squad, so they die. In Euro America, the corrupt resign as they wait for the long arm of the law to catch up with them. And then in Africa, what do the corrupt do? The corrupt are celebrated and re-elected back to office. So you can imagine that is how the corrupt are treated in Africa. That is, they are celebrated and re-elected back to office. And that is why then you find that in Africa, the corrupt basically get away with that. And I think we should be having the judiciary jailing more corrupt elements in Africa. We should be having the judiciary jailing more corrupt elements. I think that is how we are going to revive this Africa. Otherwise, the quest for Kenya to become a $1.6 trillion economy will be a pipe dream. The quest for Africa to become a $30 trillion economy will be a pipe dream, and that is why I say Africa must be able to. That is, Africa must be able to. That is, Africa must be able to jail the corrupt. The corrupt in Africa are celebrated and re-elected back to office simply because they are one of our own. We don't need West money. We don't need IMF and World Bank. We don't need China Belt and Road Initiative. We can self-finance if we live within our means. And then these people are developing projects that have no bearing on people's lifestyles. These leaders are developing projects that have no bearing on people's lifestyles, and that is why you find that in Africa, basically things are not happening because all the money. And I think, why don't we and maybe have an innovation fund for professors? Maybe give 5 million, maybe $100,000 or $50,000 to our professors every year so that they can conduct research and then they can come up with world-beating companies, the next generation world-beating companies. Why not do that? Why not come up with the next generation world-beating companies? I think that is the way to be able to develop, that is the next level companies and spur on innovation in Africa. I think, what if every engineering student got 1 million, got $10,000 to be able to effect on the idea? I can't guarantee you. I basically can guarantee you that basically there's a better idea than TikTok sitting on an African bedroom somewhere. There's a better idea than Google sitting on an African bedroom somewhere. There's a better idea than Microsoft sitting on an African bedroom in some place. And this is why I say that Africa really must be able to punch its weight. We cannot be the laughing stock of the world simply because our leaders are eating and vomiting on our shoes. We need to curb corruption. We need to stop this begging bowl, carrying the begging bowl to China, carrying the begging bowl to the West. We need to be able to effect on. We need to be able to effect on Africa being that shining city on the hill. So you let me know on what you think. Should Africa lean inwards to Africa should neither lean to the West nor to China. Africa should lean inwards to itself because of the immense resources. And I think you heard Thomas Sankara try to do that in Burkina Faso. You heard Thomas Sankara try to do that, and I think that is how he was killed by France and the West. So that's it for now. And I think you have the reincarnation of Thomas Sankara. You have Ibrahim Traore basically coming along and then trying to resuscitate the long arm of that is trying to resuscitate the vision of Thomas Sankara. So that's it for now. Bye for now. Till the next time. Bye for now.